among people, companies, and government of different nations, a process driven by international trade and investment and aided by information technology. The process has effects on the environment. I heard Mr. Chair speaking about environment this morning, on culture, on political system, on economic development and prosperity, and on human physical well-being in societies around the world. However, Giddens was able to give us a different perspective in terms of the definition. He said globalization is the intensification of worldwide social relations which link distant localities in such a way that local happenings are shaped by events occurring many miles away, and vice versa. All right. Now, of course, everybody were asked to globalize. Countries were asked to globalize. Countries were asked to join the moving trend. And of course, the concept of globalization became so much popular across the globe. And that was reflected in the many names it derived in different regions and nations. For instance, in France, it was called Mondialization. In Romania, it was called Mondializare. In Spain and Latin America, it was called Globalization. In Germany, it was called Globalizering. In China, it was called Kumquaha. In Korea, it was called Kuje Hakwa. In Nepal, it was called Bishwaya Pikerian. In Thailand, it was called Lukanuwat. In East Timor, it was called Lumbuat. In Vietnam, it was called Tongquaha. And of course, several names in different regions. That is to show how popular the concept of globalization became. However, in spite of these beautiful names, there is a need to reassess whether globalization has brought benefit to nations, particularly African and its people, or has it been always a source of marginalization, inequality, and economic exclusion of majority of Africans and their nations? I think that is what we'll be talking about this morning. All right. Now, in terms of my problem statement, this is the problem statement of my paper. At the dawn of globalization, it was postulated that a rising tide would lift all boats. This postulation led many developing countries, including African nations, to infuse themselves into the capitalist global system known as globalization. However, 31 years down the line, capitalist globalization has not even brought prosperity to many African nations, businesses, and of course, their working class or their people in general. Instead, it has exacerbated the marginalization, inequality, and economic exclusion of Africans and their nations in the sharing of global prosperity. And the research question is, has globalization benefited Africa in terms of reducing marginalization, inequality, and economic exclusion? And of course, the objective is to establish whether globalization has benefited Africans in terms of reducing marginalization, inequality, and economic exclusion. The research is a meta-analytical study which relied on secondary data. It is also an exploratory and qualitative study based on conceptual analysis and theory building. It considered global action from an economic perspective. Globalization from an African context. Of course, globalization has re-revolutionized the way businesses are done and, of course, the way we do things. At least the incursion of technology in the business environment, I think those are part of globalization, the phenomenon of globalization. And of course, in terms of also the way we manage human beings in the workplace, in terms of casualization of employment, and so many new trends in terms of how we transact. So globalization has impacted, of course, the way we do things from the business point of view and so many other point of view. The global economy, of course, has burgeoned owing to technological revolution, which has enabled people to do business across borders with less restriction. And of course, globalization seems to have impacted the developing country in several ways, but such impact has not changed the living standard of many African nations. So African countries have come to term, and of course, within the era of globalization, African countries have come to term with the hypocrisy and atrocities of the globalizers, such as since the dawn of globalization. Most of those atrocities we can see also in terms of share petroleum, destroying the environment in Nigeria, in terms of the Ogoli land, which of course led to the death, the murder of Ken Saro-Wiwa under Abacha's regime in Nigeria. And of course, in terms of also atrocities of the globalization, of the globalizer, we can also notice the murder of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, all in the name of interest. Interest of the West seems to have prevailed against the interest of many or majority of people in Africa. Is it? So when we talk about also the hypocrisy, the double standard, in so many avenues also, the West will advise us to do this, but they will be doing something else. And if you notice also, in terms of most of the leaders that were taken to the International Court at Hague, majority of them are Africans that were actually accused of violating human rights. But once upon a time, George Bush of America invaded Iraq, and of course Obama invaded Libya with his cronies, and of course none of them is standing at the Hague. So that is the issue of hypocrisy and of course double standard in terms of the global world that we have just embraced. So, well, going back in terms of how labor was utilized within the era of globalization, which of course has a very powerful implication for Africa, let us see the context with which labor was utilized within the global economy. First and foremost, what was noticed, there was a kind of vicious, growing downward spiral on wages and working conditions for workers. And of course, Africa being a third world country, and Africa being areas where you have also cheap labors, and of course, transnational corporations operating in Africa, there was total labor exploitation, and of course, a depletion of labor standard with regards to working conditions. And of course, there seems to be a deliberate job destruction and losses in terms of most of the activities of transnational corporation, from the context of making profit at all costs, however, making the labor force as stream as possible or as small as possible by introducing all sorts of sophisticated advanced technologies, and of course also reducing the number of workers as a result of measures. And of course, another thing that was witnessed was a race to the bottom in labor standard. Let me not belabor myself on most of them, but I believe most of you know what I'm talking about. So, abusive labor relationship and employee killing. Employee killing was reflected in the Marikana crisis in South Africa, where 34 mining workers were murdered for demanding for increased pay in their salaries. And of course, these are transnational corporations such as Anglo Platinum, a British company in South Africa that is actually operating in the mining sector. Can you see? So those are part of the issues in terms of the way workers have been managed within the era of globalization, and particularly workers in the third world or workers in the developing countries. And also, another thing we noticed was also a renewed tendency for casualization and flexibilization of employment relationship, which did not actually give a kind of security to workers. Most of the jobs that were created by transnational corporations are no longer permanent jobs, but just temporary job that actually does not guarantee the future of workers. We saw so many issues like labor brokering. We saw issues like casual labor. We saw issues like contract workers. We saw issues like temporary workers. We saw an issue like flexible work. So many new working patterns surfaced within the era of globalization. And of course, there was also less training to worker, because there is no way you can train a worker you know that you'll be retrenching tomorrow. So most transnational corporations were not interested in sending some workers to training. And of course, there was also issues of child labor and labor exploitation, particularly in the export processing zones. And of course, we have one of the export processing zones in Eastern Cape in South Africa. So these are also some of the dimensions that we notice. We notice also issues of corporate mergers and acquisition destroying jobs of the locals. And of course, issues of footloose speculative capital. Capital was not permanent, capital was not stable. Capital is always moving from one country to the other that can actually satisfy their urge for profit. So capital was not actually stable, and in fact, it brought about what was known as casino economy. Can you see? Casino economy, in such a way that capital became so speculative and was not ready to stay one place. All right. Now, of course, also we witness restriction on labor mobility. While transnational corporations and the advanced countries were allowed to enter into Africa as they like, Africans were restricted by so many visa regimes to enter into the West. Actually, also to distribute what they have most, because one thing Africa has very much is labor. So they were restricted in so many ways. So this is also issues of that labor standard that I'm talking about. Why transnational corporations and their capital were allowed to move into Africa, Africans were not allowed to move into the advanced country, which is, of course, a double standard. And, of course, advanced technological innovations innovations were also destroying jobs. Can you see? In most countries.
Hello?
Hello? Yes, I'm with you. Hello? 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 Hello?
Sir, you are audible, sir. Okay, 4 points.
Yeah?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please continue.
Okay, thank you very much. So advanced technological.
You can't hear.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
No sound. You can't hear.
You can hear my sound.
I can hear.
Okay, somebody is hearing me.
Yes.
Okay. So erosion of labor.
Hello?
Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you fine. Please go ahead.
Okay. So erosion of labor unions' power also was also weakening the labor union to fight, to counteract most of these.
Hello, Professor Ukpere?
Yes, sir. Hello? Hello?
Can we conclude, please? They are not able to hear.
You are not able to hear.
Professor, are there probably a problem at your end? We are able to hear.
Can you hear me?
I can hear.
Okay, I don't know. Somebody is telling me they are not hearing.
The chair is not able to hear. Can we conclude now? Can you conclude, please?
Okay. Let me just conclude. I have so many things to talk about, but of course, let me go towards my point in terms of conclusion. These are some of the slides that I really wanted to dwell on, but I think you guys can have a copy of it when I send it to the conference organizers. These are statistics of inequality in Africa. I have also reflected on the statistics of poverty in Africa. And of course, inequality, according to Balema says the gap between the rich and the poor is widening ever more since globalization. Such a situation is all the more insupportable in the midst of relatively high economic growth rate, which have been mainly for the rich. The workers have a right to their share of national wealth, which according to the government grew by 7%. And of course, another commentator says Burkina Faso is running the risk of social explosion of unpredictable consequences. The danger are all greater because endemic poverty exists alongside visible signs of wealth. Some take plane to get treated for hay fever, while others die because they cannot afford malaria treatment. And of course, on the basis of this, Mandela noted, combating inequality is an ethical and moral imperative. Massive poverty and obscene inequality is such terrible scourge of our times in which the world boasts breathtaking advances in science, technology, industry, and wealth accumulation, that they have to rank alongside slavery and apartheid as social evil. Now, these are statistics of poverty in Africa. Because of the time, I may not want to belabor myself, but of course, when I send the PowerPoint, conference members can, of course, see some of the statistics that I have presented.
Hello, Professor Ukpere.
Yes, I'm almost rounding up. I'm rounding up. Hello? Can you hear me?
Can you complete now?
Yeah, I'm almost rounding up.
Complete it?
You can see that I'm rushing to round up. Just give me about 2 minutes. All right. And of course, these are, of course, statistics of rising poverty in Africa. And of course, another statistics here. Although the level of extreme poverty has reduced in Africa, however, the number of Africans living in poverty has increased, and more of the global poor will be Africans, as reflected in the chart below. So, and of course, on the basis of this, Dare commented, he said, many transnational corporations have acted as predators in Africa, gobbling up national resources, distorting national economic policy, exploiting and changing labor relations, committing environmental despoliation, violating sovereignties, and manipulating government and media in order to ensure uninterrupted access to resources. Trans-TNCs have also supported repressive African leaders, warlord and guerrilla fighter, those serving as catalysts for later conflict and impending prospect for development and growth. Many African societies are characterized by minimal opportunities for education and self-development, collapsed infrastructure, and debilitating debt burden. These conditions have made the continent even more susceptible to international financial control. Typically, TNCs seek out societies with low production costs, poor working conditions, and abundant and easily exploitable resources where profit can be maximized and repatriated without legal constraint. The icing, of course, is a political leadership that is weak, corrupt, and ready to call the D's. TNC make huge investment in countries that meet those criteria, and many African countries feel the bill. Now, in conclusion, let me just go to conclusion. In conclusion, the trickle-down economic global system has not benefited Africa. Rather, it has become a source of marginalization and exclusion of Africans from sharing in the global prosperity. 5 fingers are not equal, and an antelope cannot compete in the same ball with an elephant. The competition between the West and the South has never been equal. What is good for the West today may not necessarily be good for Africa at this particular stage. The African continent has been marginalized and left behind by the globalization forces. Capitalist globalization, although created wealth, but also intensified inequality and poverty in Africa. Path for development African nations must look beyond the official statistics of the so-called high GDP growth rate and get down to the hard business of creating decent jobs that take out the hungry, angry, and jobless youth from the street into workplaces. Africa's small and medium-sized enterprises could be nurtured through government and NGO support to become vibrant, growing businesses that could compete globally and create additional jobs for the teeming unemployed youth population. African leaders must stop accumulating debt burden for the people. Also, IMF and China has become the latest culprit and should desist from extending unjust loans to some irresponsible African leaders. The developed countries and their cronies must stop their hypocrisies, atrocities, double standard. I'm almost through. Double standard of Africa and Africa. There is a renewed need to reactivate the commitment to activate and eradicate poverty. African countries need to develop comprehensive strategy to create their own job, particularly in rural areas. The above will reduce the number of workers rushing into the cities to create the worst nightmare of city slums, in addition to reducing the number of African migrants who perish in the Mediterranean Sea while trying to cross into Fortress Europe. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. Thank you very much. I'm done.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Any question?
Hello?
Yeah, I'm just coming.
Hello?
Yes, I'm still with you. Any questions so far? Okay.
Hello?
Yes,
Can I ask Professor Hiroshi?
Yeah. Can I share my screen?
Thank you very much.
Can I share my screen? I want to share my screen.
You can start,
Share my screen.
but the sound is very weak.
I want to share my screen. Share my screen.
Dr. Onishi?
Yeah.